Hello, everyone. I hope that everyone could see and hear me. Okay, YouTube says that my microphone is working and camera is working, so I guess that, yeah, you can. There is a chat that you can type your messages in, and I'm going to see them with a little bit of a delay, like 10 seconds or so. So yeah, in any case, if you have anything to say, or maybe say that you don't hear me, yeah, you can, of course, signal me in the chat. All right then, so let's begin. Without further ado, we're going to do the first of its kind methodology webinar for international teachers. And I'm the representative of the Teacher Training Center. I'm the head of methodology there. And here I'm going to help you with Perfect First Lessons, which is the name of the webinar today. My name is Marina, and I'm going to be your host for today. I'm going to start sharing my presentation that I have prepared and my assistant is given to help me massively with it. Yeah, especially with your tail. And yep, I really hope that now you can see my presentation as well. I see that there are 17 participants so far, which is great. I didn't actually expect that we would have so many, since all of you are coming from different countries and we know that there are different time zones. It's impossible to pick the time zone and the time slot that would be suitable for all of you. I think that the majority of you are going to watch me yeah, a little bit later. Okay, then, so what we're going to talk about today, of course, Perfect First Lessons, since the first lesson is the beginning of the personalized educational track of all of our students. It's the beginning of the student tracking the students' progress. And of course, it's the very beginning of our students' interaction with the language for sure in terms of Skyeng. So we are going to discuss the following points today. Right, this is our agenda. We're going to talk primarily about Aloha Lessons 2.0, since it's the only material that we deem suitable for the first lessons. Not all the teachers like this fact, and there are some teachers who have their own reasons, for example, not to use Aloha Lessons 2.0, but we're going to discuss all of the possible pitfalls today, discuss which particular things must be included in all first lessons and why specifically. And maybe I'm going to convince you to use Aloha Lessons 2.0 with your students. And of course, we're going to answer all of your questions regarding conducting first lessons with your students. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. I might not answer them right away as soon as I get them, but of course, we're going to get them at the very end of this webinar, or maybe somewhere in the middle if I see that the question that you ask is about the slide, for example, that we're discussing. The expected timing is around 15 minutes. I know that some of you might have your lessons after me, so I would need to let you go. And yeah, in any case, there's going to be a recording. So if you don't, for example, if you cannot attend or if you cannot watch till the end, of course, you can rewatch the recording later. So, yep, what is Aloha Lesson? This is the only material that we deem suitable for all our first lessons, and this is where you can find these materials on your platform. And in terms of first lessons, we are focusing only on these materials. They were specifically designed for first lessons with all adult students only. Please pay attention. I do know that there are some cases when, for example, some teachers were confused whether to use it with children or not. Well, the answer is no. The children have their own materials for first lessons, but if we're talking about adults, yes. You can find Aloha Lesson 2.0 materials in the general section on the platform, and all of the students of yours do have access to that. So it's not any special material that, for example, is hidden somewhere on the platform. These materials are available for all levels, from beginners to advanced. they might not be so easy to use for true beginners who do not know any word in English. But to tell the truth, there are no materials for true beginners on the platform. And we think, based on the experiments that we conducted and based on the statistics, based on the assessment of the lessons and talking to the teachers, based on our own experience, we think that it's better actually to use Aloha lesson with true beginners rather than any other material. It just depends how. We are going to take a look at this issue closer to the end, as I think, how to teach beginners and what to do with them specifically. Each lesson, if you've looked through it already, consists of 3 topical branches, and each topical branch is connected to the students' goals that your students are supposed to choose, or maybe that you're supposed to help your student choose before you go to the main part of the material. Before we move on, could you please put pluses in the chat, or maybe type in a short comment whether you've used Aloha Lesson 2.0 with your students or not. Really interested how many people out of 17 people watching us right now live have experience using it. If you do, you can specify with which level. We'll be waiting for your answers in the chat. And in the meantime, I can say that, how Aloha Lesson 2.0 started actually. It started when we wanted to develop a course for teachers on how to define the student's language level, since a lot of teachers had troubles with that because, well, basically there are no specific criteria that would that would help us identify which specific level our student is. Because, if you know about the CFR classification, you know that the language is not just only speaking, reading, listening, and writing. There are lots and lots of other skills and sub-skills, communicative strategies, communicative language activities, and communicative language competences. And it's a very complex system, and no grammar test, no placement test is going to help you identify the student's level completely. And we understood that all teachers at the very beginning of working with their student must have the tool that is going to help them, do the first lessons if there are some troubles with identifying the language level of their student. And at that time, there were no materials that you could adapt easily. If we're talking about Aloha Lesson 2.0, you are able to move from level to level. For example, if you understand that, my student is a level higher or a level lower, and I need some simpler or more difficult materials, you can, of course, switch to materials higher or lower. Okay. Well, I see that there are lots of people actually who have experience using Aloha. Pre-intermediate adults, children to adults of different levels. Wow. Intermediate adults. Okay. Well, then we have a lot of stuff to discuss. Those who answered yes, if you have any particular, particular comments or questions maybe to ask about lesson materials or some issues that you had, you can type them in the chat, and by the end of the workshop webinar, we're going to discuss them as well, so that next time, for example, when you use these materials, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to do so. Well, as I mentioned, these materials started from... Whoops. Camera decided to jump. Yep, and I'm going to fix it in a second. Well, I'm fixing my camera. I've already mentioned that Aloha started as something completely different, and we were devising the course for teachers who had some issues with identifying the student's language level at the beginning of their studies. And during the development of these materials,
we also identified lots and lots of issues that our students had at the beginning of their studies, and this is why Aloha looks like it looks right now. And if we're talking about why specifically we choose only Aloha, here I want to ask another question regarding the start of your studying. Since all of you are language teachers, and well, you probably speak some other language other than English if it's not your native language, and you studied English as a student yourself. Or if you're a native speaker, you might also have experience studying another, I don't know, Spanish, German, whatever. Uh, you do have this experience of starting to learn another language as a student. Um, Now I want you to imagine this experience in your head and ask yourself a question. If you're choosing a school and if you want to start studying somewhere, um, which questions as a student might you have before starting your studying, before you get to your first lesson with your teacher? And while you're answering, I'm going to I'm going to try the camera once again. I'm going to give you just 10 seconds to type your answers in the chat. To me personally, I have experience, well, apart from English, um, as an adult, I started learning Dutch. If anyone here is from the Netherlands, then yep, hello to you. And to me, well, the main trouble to me was to, well, to form the expectations and to understand when exactly in which specific results I'm going to expect, because I've studied English for all my life, and well, I was really afraid that that Dutch was going to take well, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before I start speaking just a little bit. And I guess that to me that was the main thing that stopped me for a very long time from studying. And I think that my first teacher couldn't actually help me with that, and I failed. So I tried to study with one teacher, then I changed the teacher, then I tried to find someone else, then I tried a lot of self-studying, but I didn't actually know what to expect and how exactly to, you know, to tune myself into studying, because I didn't know how many years it was going to take. So to me, that was the main trouble. Well, I don't see any answers in the chat yet, and I couldn't fix my camera, so yeah. Basically, probably we're going to continue. Well, I'm asking all of that for a reason, because all of our students do have similar things in their minds, and well, that could make the start of this learning process quite problematic. If we're talking about how our students get to school, get to skiing, well, there are two possible options. There might be an introductory lesson, and well, these are the lessons that you have a recording from, and you can listen to it. And there, the manager tries to identify the student's language level just briefly, whether the student is able to speak English a little bit or not. Yeah, and of course, the manager is given lots and lots of information to a potential student who is making a decision to buy lessons, actually. Or they might not be any introductory lesson. So when it happens when the students decide to start studying without any intro lesson, without any contact with the person, they just fill in a short questionnaire. They say just briefly what they think their level is, or maybe they take a short test. There are several options. And yeah, and basically you won't have any recording, and well, to be honest, you will not have any information about your student as well. So I mean, the level and the goal, just briefly, this is nothing in comparison with what information we're supposed to have. So There are some possible variations, of course, but yeah, all of our students come to the first lesson with their teacher. And now I see that we have a couple of questions in the chat. Where to begin? How long will it take before I can speak English properly? What do you want to learn? All of those questions and lots and lots and lots of other questions might be filling our students' heads and, making our students anxious about studying. Um, in some schools, for example, it wouldn't be possible to learn English if you have a specific request, and some schools will have some fixed syllabus, and the student will need to adjust their own wants and needs to this fixed syllabus. In our case, of course, it's different. We can take different courses, we can mix up the material, and we can adjust the course towards the students' needs. But not all of the students know that. Well, they might not know that it might be possible to change the course, to change the focus of the course, for example, from general to spoken, from spoken to business, from business to some other ESP courses like marketing, finance, and so on. They might not know, just like me, when exactly they're going to expect some results. And I see a couple of more questions in the chat. How long will it take to me to speak English properly? How many lessons exactly? And for some people, it's going to be quite important. How much money will I need to spend on my lessons so that I would start speaking properly? And what is properly again? So there are lots of different ways to define this properly. How can I communicate with the teacher using English language right before they get this proficiency level to start speaking? Which level will I get? So all of those questions are bugging the student's head, and this is not a very good thing to ignore those questions when we start studying. And this is why, if we're talking about our first lessons, we do need to have at least some, at least some room for this. At least some room for this discussion during the first lesson. And if we're talking about Aloha lesson, this is the only lesson material basically that allows us to shape up this discussion quite nicely and talk about the majority of those things. Of course, if you have answers to these questions, surely that we cannot put everything in one lesson, and we cannot delete a teacher from the lesson. And of course, you as teachers would need to have this information to give your students too. We're just giving a framework with which you can discuss all of that. And based on that, we are coming to a conclusion that our first lessons have to provide or give an opportunity to provide all the answers to these questions to our students. And for us as teachers, I think you're going to agree with me here on that. It's very important for us to assess the level of different skills so that we would understand how exactly to teach our students, because our teaching style for sure will vary depending on the student's level. We would need to get to know them a little bit more so that we could discuss their hobbies and interests and personalize the materials, for example, ask for their opinions about some matters and all of that stuff. And of course, we would need to get to know their study preferences. How much homework are they going to do? Are they willing to do? How many times a week are they going to study? Do they know that it's important to study 2 times a week at least, so that the forgetting curve will not diminish all the efforts that they take during the lesson? All of those things are supposed to be discussed in a lesson, and Aloha is doing that quite nicely. And going back to Aloha lessons 2.0 there. Okay. And we're going to the structure of the lesson that we're going to discuss right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about the timing of the lesson and a little bit about the structure. when I was preparing for the webinar, I got several questions from the group manager, and she told me that from some of her teachers there were some questions regarding the structure of the lesson and how to combine the branches, and which is why basically I'm going to talk about this question right now. If you have anything to add, if you have anything to clarify, structure of the lesson, feel free to again type your questions in the chat, and I do hope that my camera will start working some day or some minute. Okay, well, um, there are some lesson names for sure that we based the lesson on from the student's point of view and from the teacher's point of view. If we take a look at the first lessons as students, we would get something like this. When we come to our first lessons, we want to get to know our teacher. We want to clarify all the questions that we've just brainstormed. We want to set the goals, or we want to shape up the expectations before we rush into the study materials. We want to know what exactly we're going to be taught, and it would be great if the first lesson is going to teach, for example, me as a student, something practically applicable that I can use right after, for example, when I shut down my computer, when I don't know, open YouTube, when I watch something, I can immediately apply what I've learned. For example, some communication strategies, some listening strategies, some lexis, some vocabulary, whatever. Something has to be practically applicable by the end of the first lesson. If we're talking about the teacher's point of view, for us, I think it would be very important as well to get to know our students a little bit better, as I mentioned, so that we could personalize our lessons at least a little bit from the very beginning. We would need to gather all the information that would be necessary to tailor the course, set the goals, again, teach something useful and applicable in practice, not just to talk, for example, about some hobbies or personality types or what other topics we can imagine are popular on the platform if we're talking about first lessons. And for sure, I think it would be even more important for us as teachers to know than to students to express, to discuss the impressions that our student got from the lesson, and to clarify when exactly the second lesson is going to take place, what it's going to be about, what we're going to change in our teaching style or materials by the second lesson. All of that is going to be very important if we want to keep our students as long as possible. For sure, if we're talking about retention, long-term retention, it depends on the progress, it depends on the students' impressions, and we can influence that directly. Of course, not 100%, but to some extent, teachers have the influence on how long our students are going to study with us. All right. In terms of the structure, here I divided the scheme into two parts, into two ranges of levels for beginners and for elementary advanced. And let's begin with the biggest chunk of information here, from elementary to advanced. All of the lessons are based on a similar structure. And here we also thought that it would be better to keep this diversity, to keep the room for personalization from the point of view of the teacher, which is why, for example, at the very beginning, we have several different getting to know you activities. And here I want you to put your comment in the chat. What is your favorite? Here we have three for, to choose from. One is a game. As far as I remember, it's two truth, one lie. One is a spinning wheel with questions, and the last one is just questions, answers. As far as I remember, there are from 5 to 7 maximum questions, depending on the level. But of course, you as a teacher might ask just 2 questions, 3 questions, might ask some additional ones. Please tell me what getting to know you activity is your favorite, in your opinion. Or maybe not favorite, but your student's favorite and the most effective in terms of getting to know your student. In the meantime, to fix my camera again, and nothing works. So I guess you're not going to see me till the end. But that's fine. At least you can see my presentation. Okay. Well, nobody's given their answers yet. Spinning wheel. Okay, spinning wheels. 3 spinning wheels. All right, questions and answers. Cool. I'm happy to hear that, actually, because I personally prefer questions and answers too. Okay. You can also see that in a spinning wheel there are the same questions that you would get in questions and answers section. But spinning wheel is fun. Cool. So in terms of information, it's the same. The two blocks of information here are the same, but the form is different. One is just a list of questions, and another one is a spinning wheel. All right. It's interesting because, for example, if we're talking about Russian-speaking teachers, they would rather choose a game. And this is why we actually decided to put it in a lesson. I personally prefer not to include any games in the very first lessons with my students, because it's the time when I'm just getting to know them, obviously. Yep. And well, you never know how your adult student is going to react to a game. It's too early to me to start playing games with my students. But for a lot of teachers, it's a way to, kind of to get to know their student quite nicely. So if you can play a game effectively, that's an option too. All right. Okay, I see the option what if, probably a game as well. Question and answer. So the spinning wheel is a winner here. So yeah, that's definitely the most favorite option. Cool. That's a very cool insight for me. Thank you for your answers. Then, right after getting to know your student, you're as a teacher supposed to get to the question, why exactly do you need to learn English? So we're here coming to needs analysis and goal setting, and here we do it in a form that you might not have seen before anywhere else in any other student book, for example. And here, since all of you are in the chat already, could you please comment on whether it was easy to get your head around how exactly to do needs analysis with the slide number 2, with this goal setting slide? Was it easy or difficult for you? Because for some of the teachers, Russian-speaking teachers for sure, because we started with them, it wasn't that obvious how to help the student verbalize their wishes and wants, and how to interpret their wishes and wants into something that would be a goal for the next 8 lessons, for 6 lessons for the next month, for example. Okay, I see the first answer. Easy. All right. Cool. That sounds great. Oh, yeah. I wish it was easy for everyone, because we had some, real troubles with that, with some groups of teachers. And yeah, we also did some training on how to do the needs analysis with the help of this slide. So if anyone is having troubles, for example, with the slide, because it's, right now we understand that it's really not that obvious, you can, of course, take this training and find the answers to your questions. Elena is saying that we set a global goal. Okay, that's also cool. If your student is having some long-term goals, that could be an option too. Okay. Depending on the student's age, right? Okay. Here I see a comment about adults and children, and definitely here I would agree. I would agree on that. But with a slight comment for well, for those students who do not have any academic background, for example, or who do not have this skill of verbalizing what they want, I think all of it comes from academic background. It might be a little bit tricky for them to understand, well, how to say what I want to make. Want to speak. I want other people to understand me, and this is what they usually give us. And our goal here, our task here, is to identify. Well, speak about what, speak with whom, speak about which topics, in which situations, because depending on the topic, on the situation, you would need to work on different communicative language activities, communicative language strategies, and competences, and that would, of course, lead you to different study tracks. Okay. Dina is saying that it's difficult to scroll down the page. Yeah, that's tricky. That's yeah, that's definitely a pitfall, but unfortunately there is nothing we can do about that. Okay, depends on student's language level, depends on the student. All right, thank you for your answers here. I would probably agree with all of you. It depends on the student, and depending on the student, you would need to, well, behave differently. So you would choose different strategies, what to do with each specific student. With some, it would be possible to define a clear goal for the next 4 lessons, for instance. But with some students, well, you would probably need to do another lesson with the student to help them open up and then to get back to this question once again. That happens as well. Okay. Well, at least I see that you do have experience setting goals, and I'm happy about that as a methodologist. Okay, thank you. And yep, right after you set the goals with you're supposed to go to the slide about preferences. Here we set 2 different points to discuss, but of course this is not these are not the only things that you can discuss with your student. Here we're talking about the learning preferences and the desired intensity and the amount of homework. In terms of learning preferences, all of the students are going to have different learning preferences, and especially if you have experience teaching adults and younger students, especially like 10, maybe 12 years old, I think you would obviously see the difference that with children it would be easier to get them interested in something new, um, especially if you know shape it up in an exciting form for them. You would include a different topic and they would be ready to try everything. But with adults, since they all of them have their own, as we call it, language history or language background, they have their study background, they might have some preferences or maybe some stereotypes formed about the study process, and quite frequently it might be very, very difficult to fight with those stereotypes. For example, some students might say that, well, I would need to translate everything, and they would read the text and they would immediately translate it before you go to any speaking exercise, vocabulary exercise, or anything like that. There might be no reason why exactly they are doing that, except for, well, my teacher did that to me at school, and this is why I prefer you to do the same with me. So such stereotypes, of course, might be beneficial for our students sometimes if they're good language learning principles, and some stereotypes might be not really effective. For example, we're talking about translating everything into their first language. So all of that stuff we would also need to discuss all of that stuff at the very beginning, just because, again, you are a completely new teacher to them. You don't know each other yet. You don't know each other quite well. Your teacher doesn't know your teaching style yet, and here you're supposed to discuss all of that, and make sure that you are going to teach them in a way that they're ready to be taught, and that they are going to let you teach them, especially if they have some academic background and if they have their own preferences. In terms of intensity as well, it's very important to let the students know that the intensity, high intensity, is a must, and it's not a marketing trick. It's not, trying to sell them more lessons or something like that, because this is the first reaction, that the first argument that we get when we're talking about intensity. This is how the forgetting curve works. This is how, well, basically the mind works. If you don't use the skill for a long time, for 7 days, for example, that would be enough already, you're going to forget it. And the longer the break between your lessons is, the more concentrated your study is going to be, and the more revising activities you would need to include in your lessons, the more tests you're going to do in your lessons, and it's going to end up boring routine for your student. But if you have higher intensity, for example, and if you don't spend that much time on revising everything, you're going to have much more room for personalized discussion, for, I don't know, some creative speaking activities. That's proven to work in a way. And for example, our students who study at least twice a week study much longer in month than students who study just once a week, just because students who study once a week lose their motivation quite fast, right, quite quickly, and well, end up finishing their studies quite early before they get any progress. So that's also a very important but not very easy thing to discuss as well. But if we're talking about Aloha Lesson 2.0, there are some teacher notes that you can use, for example, with some pluses and minuses, why it's good to study more and why it's not really good to study just once a week, for example. So you can use that too. Okay, and here we're getting to the main topic. And again, I'm going to ask you the question about your experience using Aloha Lesson. Which branch out of those three, have you tried already with your students? There are three branches as far as you remember: small talk, business situations, and traveling tips. All of those branches, by the way, are based on the global goals that our students might choose at the beginning of the lesson. And the logic here is that we tried to connect the main part of the lesson to the students' goals, at least somehow. If they have some, generic goals like to talk to people, to communicate with people, small talk probably would be good. If they want traveling, then okay, we're going to discuss some traveling tips. But if they're studying English for work, then business situations are going to be better. And in this way, we're making sure that the students are going to study something that is practically applicable, sorry, or at least somehow related to what they've chosen as their primary goal. Alternatively, for example, if we exclude this topic choice from the lesson, here I have a story from the first Aloha lesson that was created a year ago, I guess. Doesn't seem so long ago, but I mean, in terms of the materials, they evolved since then. The old Aloha lesson was about robots, about Boston Dynamics, as far as I remember, and well, it could happen it could happen in such a way that the student would say that they need English for something specific. They would have some specific preferences. They would, for example, want to study for exams or something, and then the teacher would say, well, okay, we're going to work with that later. No, Boston Dynamics. uh, well, depending on the teacher, for sure. uh, it could have been okay in some situations, and a lot of teachers could use these materials quite nicely with their students to play around that. But for some of the teachers and students that switch from creating the personalized learning track to the material that was completely off of their track, well, that was something that made the student make a decision to leave right after the first lesson. So this is why, again, we decided to include three branches here. And I think, um, okay, I see that we have a lot of options here. Lots of you like small talk. Some of you like business situations and traveling. Traveling is much more fun. Okay, well, I do agree. I also like this branch, and yeah, I really, I'm really happy that you can identify your favorite branch already. By the way, if you didn't notice, there are the recordings for all of the texts in our lessons in all of the branches. I think we added them on Monday or yesterday. Well, this week we added the recordings into the lessons. And yeah, if you were concerned about the fact that, well, texts are too boring to read with my students during first lessons, well, now you can listen to um, recordings, audio recordings. And that's, I think, going to give an element of diversity as well here too. Okay, well, all right. Dean is writing a comment. Boston Dynamics was a very interesting lesson. Well, it was. I really do think that it was a good lesson, but in terms of the lesson structure here, if we connect it to working with the students' goals and to their preferences and giving them the choice, well, statistically, it didn't fit. And I think no lesson would fit here if we just, working with the structure of this lesson too. Okay. All right. And the last part of the lesson here is the cool down. And the cool down consists of three points to discuss here. First, you're supposed to give your feedback to your student. And this is a very traditional way of, shaping up the end of the lesson. Then we're asking our students what impressions they had from their lesson. And depending on what they say, we make some plans for the next lesson. If they say that, well, it was a little bit difficult for me to speak, or it was a little bit difficult for me to understand you because I have some bad listening skills, we would say that, well, next time we're going to work on this and this and this, and the next lesson is going to take place, for example, here and there. And yep, this is a good way to end the lesson. And in a similar way, we also work with beginners. The only difference in beginners is that they have an additional stage with level diagnostics. Of course, the materials here are graded down as well as much as possible. For example, somewhere instead of the text, we're using the images and photos and, well, grading down the language as much as possible. But we know that beginners can be different. Some of them would be true beginners, some of them would be false beginners, some of them are not beginners at all. They're somewhere in the somewhere in between beginning and continuing their studying. And here, this is why actually we decided to include additional level diagnostics. And we divided the main part into an easier branch and a more challenging branch. And this is why here you have not three, but six branches. Three topical branches, each of them would be divided into an easier and a more challenging one. Here we're focusing, well, not on a communicative approach per se. Here we use lots of drilling, and we use lots of sentence frames and sentence stems, as we call them. to make it easier for the student to produce the language as much as possible during their first lesson. Because if we follow the traditional communicative approach, we would give a lot of input to our student. Our student won't be able to say anything. We would need to use a lot of L1, and well, basically that's not the best way to start your lessons. Here we focused on sentence stems and drilling, and on working with the dialogues, pre-recorded dialogues, and this is why we see that our students actually like it much more in comparison with other lessons for beginners. But all of the other parts are the same, but as I mentioned, they are graded down. And in terms of the duration, again, we get a lot of questions from a lot of teachers how to manage the timing of the lesson. Here is the answer. If we're talking about all of the, well, as we, as we say, administrative activities, getting to know your needs analysis and preferences, I would say that the maximum here would be 15 minutes. 5 minutes for getting to know you, 5 minutes for needs analysis, I don't know, 5 minutes for discussing preferences. Right after it, we go to the topic choice and the main part of the lesson. That would take approximately 30 to 35 minutes. And then around 5 minutes would be left for the cool down. This is the perfect timing, but for sure, there are some instances when you would spend, for example, the whole lesson on the first slides discussing your students' preferences, for example, or your students' experience or wishes or whatever. Or you might spend a little less time there, for instance, 5 minutes on all administrative questions, and move to the main part. That solely depends what the framework is, as follows, as you see. 15 minutes for the main part, for the intro part, 35 for the main part, and 5 for the cooldown. And well, basically, that's the point about the structure. If you have any additional comments or questions about the structure, feel free to put them in the chat while I'm going to move to the next slide of mine. I'm going to clarify who to use it with. I've already mentioned, I think, that Aloha Lesson 2.0 is primarily for adults. Well, you could potentially use it with someone who's 16, 17, 18, but if we're talking about SkySmart children in general, they have their own lesson materials that they're supposed to take during their first lessons, and Aloha Lesson is only for adult students. Well, but if you see that some of the points from Aloha are suitable for your students, you're free to choose for sure. And if we're talking about some other scenarios, there could be several. So you might get a student who has never studied at Skyeng before, and well, you would be their first teacher here. In this case, well, we would need to take the full Aloha Lesson 2.0 materials for the first lesson, but there are some possible, again, derivations here. There might be an intro lesson, and depending on the information in your intro lesson, you might find some info that would get you to choose different material, but you would still need to take slides 1 to 3. And then if you see that, well, my students needs, for example, I don't know, English for marketing, English for job interview or whatever, or my student needs I don't know, some other very, very specific course, and the main body of Aloha is not suitable. You're free to choose whatever material you deem suitable here, but slides 1 to 3 are a must, because basically there are no other ways that would guarantee that you set the goals and discuss the preferences with your students in a way that we deem good. Right. And well, if there was no intro lesson, then well, that's the easiest scenario. Take the full Aloha lesson and then move as you go. But there could also be such a situation when you get a student from a different teacher, or well, the student had some lessons some time ago at Skyen, for example, a year ago, before being assigned to you, and well, again, there could be some different derivations. If your student had already been if Aloha lesson had already been studied by the student, then probably you would need to take some different materials instead of Aloha. But if it happened a long time ago, for example, half a year ago, we strongly recommend taking slides from 1 to 3, clarifying the student's goals and expectations, and then proceeding to some other lesson materials that your student didn't take before. But if been studied with your student, well, taking the full Aloha lesson would be the option here. Or again, if you see that well, your student needs the course materials right during the first lesson, again, taking slides 1 to 3 and then moving to some other lesson materials would be an option. All right. And basically, this is the scenario. If you have any concerns about that, I'm really waiting for your answers, questions in the chat. Well, but here we've tried to look through all the main scenarios that could possibly happen. If you have anything in mind to ask about that, then of course feel free. We're going to discuss. And yep, while I'm waiting for your questions and answers in the chat, I'm going to move to the last, but I think the most interesting part in our discussion is how to teach beginners. Yep, right. At the very beginning of the webinar, I've already asked which lessons you had. Yeah, I think I haven't seen a beginner one. Okay, they were pre-intermediate students, intermediate, elementary. Okay, please tell me, have you ever had an experience teaching beginners with Aloha lesson? Okay, looking through the comments. Yep, if you have to go, you can go. There is going to be a recording, and I think we're going to finish in 10 minutes or so, and you can watch the last 10 minutes. Okay, and yep, we're going to get back to discussing beginners and elementary students. The main concern here is how to use English only. That's a very big topic to discuss, and I'm not really sure that we would be able to answer all of your questions that you might have about that in 10 minutes that we're going to spend on this last slide. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to outline the main difficulties, why exactly teaching beginners and elementary students might be tricky, how our materials could help, and what else you can do to study the issue further, because we have some materials to help you, and we're also planning to devise a course specifically for international teachers regarding grading your language and teaching students with whom you do not share your L1. Yeah, I really hope that I'm going to be helpful in this. Well, I don't see any answers in the chat regarding whether you had any experience teaching, but yeah, at least we had one elementary student from Dina. Okay, well, if we're talking about teaching beginners and elementary students, first thing is to decide exactly which specific issues we're going to try to avoid or we would need to solve. And the range of issues from methodology to psychology to whatever kinds of issues that we might get here are the following. First is that, for example, you might imagine that happening in a lesson. They might not know how to perform the simplest task, for example, listen and answer, or listen and match, listen and tick, or something like that. They can't understand what their teacher asks them to do. they might be too demanding to themselves, and they expect too much from themselves. Well, that might happen because, for example, they think that they are adults, they are supposed to know everything, and they are supposed to perform perfectly, even though they are beginners. That's a very dangerous psychological trick that has a great role here. They easily get demotivated after they understand that, well, they cannot actually perform the simplest tasks, and it affects their motivation levels further during the second lesson, third lesson, fourth lesson, and so on. And what's more important here is that, well, typically with higher level students, one trick that would work quite nicely here is to show in a real situation that they can already do something with their language. We would role play some situations, we would watch some videos, we would analyze how well we performed, and then the student would see, like, oh, wow, I can speak actually, I can understand people. Okay, so maybe I'm not performing as badly as I think. But if we're talking about beginners, it's impossible to find authentic materials for them because authentic, of course, authentic materials are not designed for beginners, and this is why they're authentic. And the point here that a teacher must do in green stickers is a point for discussion here. First thing that we teach our teachers, for example, to do in a select course that I'm going to mention a little bit later is message abundance. And providing message abundance each time you're telling something to your student. Please put a plus in the chat if you know what message abundance is, and put a minus if you don't. While I'm waiting for your answers in the chat, I'm going to continue here. Providing thinking time is a must because for beginners, processing the language is going to be much, much more time consuming in comparison with higher levels. If you ask a question, wait for 5, 6, maybe even 7 seconds before you start helping your student. Never ever give 2, 3, or more questions at once. Ask a question, let your student answer, and then proceed. Model all the answers. For example, if we're talking about some communicative tasks, right? Some dialogues, you would give some sentence stems. For example, you would see such sentence stems in a getting to know you activity, by the way. Right here. Beginners questions and answers, and there is an activity with sentence stems where a student is supposed to finish the sentences. For example, I am from blah blah blah, I am interested in their options, right? So you're given those models, so it would be easier for students to talk. And getting back to message abundance, I see 6 minuses here. Yay! Okay, so here I'm going to explain what that is. Unfortunately, I don't have my camera working properly right now, and this is why I cannot demonstrate how it works. But for example, message abundance is a situation when you deliver information in different ways at the same time. So, for example, you say a sentence, you gesture in the same way, and, for example, you show a picture on the platform in the same way. So, I don't know, there is someone eating something really tasty, well, you need to teach your student, well, this is delicious or something like that. I don't know why a beginner would need the word delicious, but maybe I just want to eat right now. This is why I had this association. Never mind. In any case, that would work with any Lexus, for example, that you could show, or any any word that you can demonstrate, for example. So you would show a picture on the platform, you would show a word in a dictionary, you would gesture it, you would mime it, and you would pronounce it at the same time. So basically, this principle is about using all the sensors that you could possibly use to deliver the message well at the same time. For example, if you want your student to match something, read and match, or listen and match, the student, well, probably is not going to know what match is. And you're going to gesture what matching is. You would connect your fingers and show that this is matching activity. And this is one of the principles of ensuring message abundance. And that would, of course, require lots and lots of actions from you, but that works. Well, basically, here in message abundance leads us to this interesting principle, not teaching grammar, but teaching chunks and functional language. Please comment in the chat whether you agree with it or not. From the first from the first few. I'm going to explain what that means. Well, basically, beginners do not need to know anything about the language during their first steps. They just need to speak. They do not need to know that some verbs are auxiliaries, some verbs have special endings, there are some exceptions. This is this tense, this is that tense. They cannot use it now. And during the very first steps, it's much better not to teach them any theory, but just give them chunks so that they can open their mouth and immediately start speaking with pre-learned, drilled structures that they do not know how to form yet, but they know how they sound and how to use them. They are going to analyze them further on the go. But right now they're going to use them. For example, we would teach such phrases as, I don't know, some functional language of asking questions or asking for clarification. For example, can you repeat? Can you say it again? Can you say it louder? The student doesn't know to need any theory about forming questions. They just need to drill how to answer, how to ask such questions. Or if we're getting back to Aloha lesson, for instance, during the first lesson in small talk, we teach phrases I like, I don't like. The student practically doesn't need to know that, well, to form a negative form of a sentence with a verb, you need to use an auxiliary verb. Well, the student will not care at this point. The student just needs to know how to use the phrase I like something, I don't like something. No theory, no grammar. They just need to use the language that would help them see the progress immediately. And this is why we're getting to the second point about grading the language. All the language that we use needs to be as understandable as possible. We're planning the course on that. And for example, if we're talking about grading the language, it's not only about linguistic complexity. It's also about the speed of your speech. It's about the use of fillers. It's about the conceptual complexity. Well, about message abundance that we've discussed already. In terms of fillers, for example, the point that I hear a lot in lessons is teachers using lots and lots of fillers. For example, let's think about the question. What would you say about the weather today? Or something like that. Instead of asking, what is the weather? Where all of those fillers, what do you think, or any other, or what some people would think, or any other fillers that we could put into the question are blocking the understanding of what our student is going to comprehend. And that is a way, again, to simplify your speech, to try not to use any fillers, and you can take a look in the you can say section or teacher's notes in Aloha Lesson Beginners and try to analyze how the teacher's phrases are formed there. We deliberately tried not to use any fillers, not to use any phrases that would make them a little bit more natural. And we tried to keep them as understandable as possible, but maybe not really natural sounding. Because, yeah, in any case, the student is not going to understand any natural, unadapted language. And yeah, getting back to the end of this slide, how exactly lesson materials need to be structured to provide this help for our student. Here, the first point is, of course, scaffolding. And by scaffolding here, we mean that all of the points that we teach have to follow a very, very logical sequence. And for example, if you're teaching your student to use some phrase, if you want your student to role play a dialogue by the end of the lesson, you would need to build a ladder that would lead your student towards this activity. First, you would help them with the sentence stems. Second, you would help your student with the lexes that they would need to use. Then you would connect it all together, and only then you would go to the dialogues. Following this logical structure helps our students immensely. And all of the other points are basically connected to what we've discussed already. Lots of drilling activities have to be included in a lesson. As little theory as possible, unless our students actually ask for theory. And all of the points that we study must be based on communicative situations, even with beginners. It's not, well, it's easier said than done. I know what you think about me right now. It's definitely easier said than done. But in terms of a webinar, of course, it wouldn't be possible to look through all the points in one. And this is why I'm going to recommend you taking a look at the course, self-study course on how to teach beginners. The link is going to be provided with the video, and well, the ID of the course is 1122, How to Teach Beginners English. Well, here you could find all the information that you could possibly need to to put all those principles that we have discussed just right now into your practice. And one more point is that tomorrow we're going to do a methodology podcast on how to teach low-level students without L1. I'm going to do this podcast with Gary, our TTC expert and our speaker for student speaking clubs. And yeah, I really hope that it's going to be quite useful as well. There is going to be a recording of this podcast, and well, if you want, you can take a look at this as well. Okay, well, I see that I'm definitely over my timing, and I really need to wrap it up because some of you definitely have your own personal activities that you would need to do, not listening to me. And we're getting to the summary of this webinar. So the summary here is that, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on who we're talking about, whose point of view, Aloha lessons are the only materials that we trust in terms of the quality, and this is why they became obligatory to use. But I do hope that you got the message from this webinar that they're easy to use and they're much, much more adjustable and personalizable, if I can say so, than it could seem. And there is much more room for your creativity, for example, if you're concerned about how you're going to adjust it towards different students. And I really do hope that I could potentially minimize all the pitfalls that you might experience using this lesson material. I'm going to keep watching the comments under this video, and if you have any questions regarding the content of this webinar, feel free to type in your questions, and I'm going to try to answer all of them. Really sorry for keeping you here that long, and really sorry for my stupid camera that stopped working. Right, and okay, if you have any questions regarding the Aloha lessons, for example, or the materials of the webinar, feel free to contact me or contact your manager. Really hope that you're going to have a wonderful week, and thank you for joining this webinar today. Bye bye then, and see you around. And yeah, I hope that you would attend the podcast tomorrow as well. Would be happy to see you there. So thank you then, and bye bye.